and let us all do we can to build a better future. All right, so we are now going to move on to our next story. Again, huge shout out to Case Study QB, who's sitting through corporate media so we don't have to. And Case Study QB, everyone tweet at him. I don't know how you sat through this one, but we're going to go to Morning Joe, Dan, because guess what? What's for brunch? Well, apparently, it's A-okay to make decisions in back rooms about who's going to be in power and who's going to do this, because apparently good old Morning Joe likes the fact that Truman was selected over FDR's former VP, Henry Wallace. But let's first play this clip, and then I have some interesting facts to share with you about Henry Wallace. So let's play this first video.
Let's hear the establishment make noise.
Let's go back to 1944, and when they were in Chicago, and they were in the smoke-filled rooms, and you had FDR's brain trust trying to figure out who was going to be Roosevelt's next vice president, because Roosevelt, though he was in many ways close to Henry Wallace, understood that they needed someone else, that he might not survive, and FDR and others didn't trust Henry Wallace to be the next vice president of the United States. This second Missouri Compromise did end up being Harry Truman. Nobody at that time expected Truman to do what he did, which was, in effect, create a foreign policy that over the next 70 years would actually shape what the next 12 presidents, the next 12 commander-in-chiefs who followed him would do. The other thing about Truman, and you touched on such an important point, he was a lot like Ronald Reagan, who just didn't give a damn at the end of the day what his critics thought about him. I had two pictures in my office when I was in Congress. One was of Harry Truman. One was of Ronald Reagan. Truman began the Cold War. Reagan and George H.W. Bush ended the Cold War. But what I thought was so unbelievable about Harry Truman was he was getting attacked from all sides, and he just didn't care. Henry Wallace not only was eviscerating Harry Truman and other progressives at the time, not only attacking Harry Truman in the United States, Wallace would go to Great Britain and have speaking tours and attack the American president for standing up to Stalin. And so elections do have consequences, and perhaps no other vice presidential selection in the history of this republic mattered more than what happened in Chicago in 1944 when Roosevelt decided, and the convention in Chicago decided, that Harry Truman was going to be Roosevelt's vice president.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to just take away from this. First of all, the Reagan worship by our corporate media is getting very smug, very sickening. Ronald Reagan wasn't the end-all, be-all champion of the Republic. I mean, he wasn't our Augustus Caesar. If there was one, it was FDR, and maybe to some other extent it could be argued Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, there are going to be politicians that will forever be unable to fit the shoes that Theodore Roosevelt and FDR have made, have made in regards to this, their impact to this country. And now, first of all, Theodore Roosevelt and FDR are not saints. They're people just like us, don't hero worship politicians, be they alive or dead. But it's just rather disgusting that we are hearing on the corporate media the cheerleading of decisions being made behind closed doors, similar to what they did to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and in 2020 to all progressives, independents, and third-party candidates. We see these decisions being made behind closed doors. Now, why was Truman selected? Because here's the thing about Henry Wallace. He worked on a lot of, local, like here in the United States, a lot of our local policies, domestic policies. And Henry Wallace, he was the Secretary of Agriculture under Warren G. Harding. And his family was originally Republican, but he broke with the party in 1928 over its highly protectionist tariff policies. Later, he joined the Democratic Party, and his extensive familiarity with farming, combined with the success of delivering conservative Iowa to the radical New Deal in 1932 national elections, made him a natural choice for Secretary of Agriculture during Roosevelt's first two terms. As Agricultural Secretary, he formulated and administered New Deal legislation, especially with Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, designed to raise and stabilize farm prices, conserve soil, store reserves, and control production. Now, he was the VP for FDR's third term between 1941 and 1945. And look, he understood domestic issues very well. And when Truman became VP, Truman had no idea about some of the policies that FDR was working on, most notably the atomic bomb and so much more. But Truman was the one who led us into the Cold War. We could have had, look, to be very clear, Stalin was a tyrant through and through. But the way the United States handled the Cold War and how we have involved ourselves in regime change wars after that,
we're still stuck in it right now.
We're still stuck in it. And just because Reagan and Bush Sr. ended the Cold War, we're still removing democracies. We're still doing coups. And this was all started by Truman. And I think we need to remember that we can't just be cheerleading on the fact that progressives are being destroyed by the corporate media. Because the thing is, it turns out progressives were right to call out the establishment and these regime change wars and so much else that the establishment media has allowed to happen. We can't let them rewrite history. And at the same time, too, we have to call out these politicians for what they are. And now more than ever, the media, the fact that they're allowing this, it's almost as if they're saying to the people, it's okay that we can, it's okay for the establishment to make these decisions. You don't need to worry about it. We'll continue business as usual. But let's look at where business as usual has led us. We're in this horrible spot right now, Daniel.
Yeah, so on that note, we literally just were covering a little bit ago a lawsuit to the DNC from the last election where they talk about having smoke-filled rooms where they decided. I've never seen someone on TV so giddy about it. Maybe it's the same kind of person who said that if Bernie would have won the primary, they would have voted for Trump. I don't know. Maybe there's a coincidence in there that these guys are really not Democrats and they are just Republicans, and Republicans are just far right. And again, I mean by leadership, not by individual person. And progressives don't really have any home right now that we must build ourselves. But this is exactly what we come to expect, and this is exactly what we can expect and do expect from mainstream media is, hey, yeah, this non-democratic way of picking someone was probably the best choice because of a foreign policy of Cold War that brought us to a point where we now have, as we talked a little about earlier with JFK, talking about how close we are to nuclear annihilation. And right now, how we have this surveillance state, which is the biggest, how should I put it, legacy of the Cold War. The fact that it has made America, it's like on 9/11. It was, what did Bin Laden want? He wanted to take down America with an attack, and he did completely. We threw away our freedoms. We threw in a security state. We armed everyone in government so that we could protect freedoms that we gave away ourselves, so that we could go to other countries and invade them and topple them, and just also get Iraq too for some reason, because oil, I suppose. This is, the Cold War has led to now. We're dealing with the Cold War now. Here's the reality. If we went back in time to right around this happened, you had two real choices. Try and make an actual reasonable peace with Stalin, which, is a difficult person to deal with. Or continue the war. Don't stop World War II until Russia is also taken out. That's what Patton wanted to do. I feel like those are both better choices than the Cold War, because someone would have won Europe anyway if we had done that. Likely the U.S., because we're just getting to fully mobilizing. Russia had run out of everything at that point. I mean, they had a decent amount by the end. But my point is, the Cold War was perhaps the worst outcome that we've gone through, because now it's all about security state. Now it's all about arms race. Now it's all about building up stocks of weapons that we don't need and stealing a future from the middle class, stealing a future from the working class, and paying it all back to the elites. That is what the Cold War entrenched in us. And now we have systems of redundancy caused by the Cold War, both in government, with shadow government, with the strength of intelligence agencies as they are, because we were trying to posture to another place. And so we had to use those weapons somewhere. So perhaps it would have been best to just go to war with Russia than do what we did.
Well, don't tell it to Rachel Maddow. She'll think that's a good idea. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
Daniel, let's go to war. Like, no.
We
But
made a terrible decision.
I think in the long run, what we have to remember is these decisions that are made in closed rooms by the establishment have long-lasting have a long-lasting reach that affects generations not yet born. And the thing is, what are the consequences or repercussions of the DNC and corporate media and Clinton campaign allowing election fraud to happen in 2016 and Bernie Sanders' willingness to let it happen, not once to him, but twice? Are we going to be stuck with this horrible mindset of, well, we got to keep on voting for lesser evilism? I think what people need to realize is that these decisions behind closed doors have led us to this point of voting for the lesser of two evils. And when you vote for the lesser of two evils, know this, you're still voting for evil. Look at the Biden administration already. You're seeing a lot of these activists and progressive groups and people on Twitter saying, I can't believe Joe Biden is doing this. This is exactly what those people in those closed rooms decided to do. When Obama made that phone call to Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, that was a closed door decision, but he had support with key power brokers within the DNC establishment. And now we're stuck with a Biden administration. And yeah, Trump's gone, but the system that gave us Trump is still there. The people making those decisions are still in power. You just don't see them because Trump, being the arrogant SOB that he is, he's going to let everyone know what's going on because he's transparent like that. Of course, he's horrible and downright vile, but at least with Trump, you understood where you stood with him. And you knew what he really thought of those who thought differently than him. But with Biden, they put on this happy-go-lucky smile, and they say things that people want to hear, and Biden is definitely not Trump, but he's still the same. The people who are in power are still in power. This decision, especially that was made long before any of us were born, when Truman was selected as FDR's VP, I only could wonder what would happen if Wallace still remained as FDR's VP. We could what if as much as we want. The ink is already dry, but who knows? Who knows what that world would have been like? Maybe things would have been different. Maybe some things still would have been the same, but all of this could have been avoided. And it requires us to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right. Right now, we live in a world where on TV, on the quote-unquote left channel, which is funny.
Left. Wow, I can't believe you even that is a reach. Even doing that's a bridge too far.
That's what people say it is. That they hire Republicans to do news on the left channel more than they do progressives, an infinite amount more, it turns out. And right now we're in a time where you could be on the left channel, NBC, and say with a straight face, as a Republican, yeah, I'm really happy that we decided how this would have worked and not left it up to the people. That was pretty great. That was a great decision. I'm really glad we made that decision. And no one goes, what? In a just world, in a well-functioning world, that should cause a scandal the same amount as, a sexual assault allegation from like 10 of the anchors, saying that this is a good thing that the government took over this democratic process.
What can you expect from Morning Joe? But hey, that's what's for brunch. The establishment is happy that things are being decided by those who will never know, that we'll never see. And the media is going to happily report it because, hey, we don't want to upset people. We don't want to let people know that we are a global superpower, and yet we cannot take care of our own people. But hey, let's be happy about Truman, and let's also hero worship Reagan, because that's the only thing our media knows what to do. Hero worship a senile old man, just like how they're doing with Biden. So basically, nothing has fundamentally changed.
Look at that. We're back to normal.
Back to normal. The neoliberal normal, even though things are falling apart. The house is on fire, but this is fine. What's for brunch?